Everybody for being here. Let's get started. Calling the meeting to order. Just remember the mission of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to optimize transportation services and development in our region, and our vision is to maximize the airport's benefit to our region. As always, we appreciate participation from the public. If you have any comments throughout the session, please stand and state your name, and your comments will be heard. So with the quorum of board present, I call the meeting to order. Roll call. Commissioner Eretz. Present. Commissioner Bakke is here. Commissioner Gibbs. Here. Commissioner Lalonde. Here. Commissioner Hogan.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Smith.
Smith. Here.
And Commissioner Timbo is not. All right, let's start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll start off with the consent agenda, which is obviously made up of routine day-to-day items that require forward action but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion vote by any board member. Today's items are A, approval of board meeting minutes for March 29, 2022. B, payroll checks totaling $106,414.29. C, maintenance and operation checks number 26671 through 26727, totaling $521,956.59. D, approved passenger facility charge totaling $45,591.32. And E, financial reports for March of 2022. Are there any items that the board would like to pull for additional consideration? Okay, with no other items, do I have a motion?
I would move to accept the consent agenda as stated.
And okay, I've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? No further discussion. All in favor of approving the consent agenda as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? No nays. Consent agenda has it. Thank you. All right, we got lots of work today, so let's jump right in, John.
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to bring to your attention is I passed around a spreadsheet. It's actually two pieces of paper that looks a little bit like this. Got 4 or 5 columns there with some information on it. Just on, I believe it was Friday, no, actually, I think it loaded Saturday. The Department of Transportation loaded the Small Community Air Service Development grants that came in for this cycle of grant award. So these are the proposers that have applied for a grant from that program. And so this list, the first page of this list is sorted by cash ratio, which is essentially what you're asking for from the federal program or funding request, divided by your local cash match. So the local cash match is what we were able to more or less raise here locally. And so this list is sorted by that, and obviously you want a higher cash match. Actually, you want the lowest cash match you could get and still get a grant, but to be competitive, you want the highest cash match you can get. This year is about $18 million allocated into this program. You can see the funding requests add up to $33 million. So we're nearly half of the available of the requests is there in available funding. The DOT doesn't really ever split the baby. They don't go out and say, well, everybody gets half. Or anything like that, or at least they haven't to date. This program isn't that old. I'd say it's only about 10 or 15 years old now. So they'll likely award to their dollar amount based on whole proposals. As you can see on the entry-level page here, our consultant guided us well. We end up in the top 10, actually number I think 6, in terms of cash asked for per local match. That's a very competitive spot to be in. We think that puts us in a good position for a potential award. On the second page, I resorted the same information by the size of the grant. So with some quick math with 46 proposals and $33 million, that generally means about $625,000 in grants available per proposal. As you can see in here, we're kind of in the middle. This was actually shaded. I should have printed it in color. We're about midway down there. with our grant request of $700,000. So we're just about at that average of dollars available per proposer, which puts us in a strong position and middle of the pack in terms of size of proposal. So if the board's really looking, where are we getting a good bang for our buck? I mean, everybody's going to get some flights through this program. Is there anyone out there that's asking for an awful lot for what they get? We're not in that sphere, up in that upper third, as you might look at that. And so we feel that we're in an excellent position to pursue a SCASD grant in this cycle. They've told us that we'll likely hear in June. They oftentimes turn that out a little early. There is a conference June 13th through the 15th called Jumpstart down in Reno, which I'll be attending to meet with the airlines on schedule planning. My expectation is they'll likely try to get that grant out prior to Jumpstart. They're fully aware of that conference and the route planning cycle, and I think they'll probably want to have that information out to airports so we can begin that discussion during our time at Jumpstart. And so our hope would be, obviously, I mean, we feel very confident. Oh, the other thing I was going to note, most of you probably aren't real familiar with airport codes, and I didn't have time to go down and swap these all out for the airport name, but as I look through this, I don't find any other Montana airports and very few in the Northwest. So I think the other thing that tends to factor into this from time to time is kind of a regional bias. You can find sometimes everybody's grouped up and you'll have 4 or 5 Montana airports applying, or you'll have 4 or 5 in the Northwest, which really gives them some pause, even if they're good proposals, doling that much out to one region. I feel like this list kind of actually slides to the east a little bit more. There's a lot of smaller eastern airports in here. They're actually applying for long-haul routes. There's quite a few routes in here really far. Which again is another factor. I think that when you look at the competitiveness in a $100 oil environment with a pilot shortage, boy, you'd sure like to have a short stage length so you can recycle that pilot 4 or 5 times a day, as opposed to something that's a 1,000+ mile route where you're really using that pilot a lot. So I feel like we're in a fairly good position from both geography and from the length of stage length. A route to Dallas is a long route for us. But frankly, there's many other routes here that are the same or further. So I feel pretty comfortable with that too. We do have a letter of support from American Airlines, which is our primary grant request, which I don't know how many of these did get a letter of support. I haven't had time to read every proposal in here. But sometimes there are ones in here that don't have an airline letter of support. They're kind of fishing. And you can kind of see that sometimes you might see, well, any airline to San Francisco, or any airline to or any airline that's a low-cost airline, kind of in the summary. Generally speaking, that may not be a well-researched proposal. So I feel like we're in a really strong position for this. Come June, I'm hopeful that we'll hear that we will receive a SCASD grant, and we'll be in some meetings in Reno, potentially even with American Airlines, to start talking about future service. So really exciting information there. When I saw that loaded up, I was pretty encouraged. On to the next subject. We are
just before you jump into that,
yeah.
It looks like the closest ones are Idaho Falls and Rapid City, which are
Yeah.
significantly, well, Rapid City's probably close to our size, but Idaho Falls.
I would think Rapid City's probably larger than us nowadays. The national park airports have really shot up. But yeah, no, that's still pretty far away, and I think most people would view, if you're from the east, you would view that as Midwest, as opposed to Montana, which you would view as West. So these DC-based folks at DOT, I think, would look at that as different regions. Hopeful. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty competitive field. I'm really encouraged by where we are. So,
What kind of capacity would that be?
We don't know. Given again, we're stuck in one of the most difficult times, I think, in the industry, right? I mean, there aren't pilots. We're short on small planes still. I mean, that's a trend that we've been seeing the last 15 years, that the 50-seaters are going away. Worse yet, the operators of 50-seaters are all in big trouble. We lost Trans-States, which used to run flights up here. They're gone, and SkyWest is really struggling. And so, it's a good question. We're on the precipice of what looks to be a recessionary environment by the time we get to next summer, and who knows what oil's going to do. So I mean, we kind of make a snowball out of that. I can't really forecast what we're looking at next year. I would imagine we're looking at weekend only to start. That's my best guess. But then
that's a 3.5-hour route, so it's going to be at least a 175 or so.
I think it needs to be, yeah, I was gonna say, I think it needs to be 700, because the American has the shorter haul 70s, so they don't have the extended range. So I would guess it's a 90. But at the same time I said all of that, not every region is still working. Certainly nothing international is going to work well yet again this year. I mean, you're not going to China on vacation. That consolidates that leisure travel into places like Montana again, which it has worked well the last 2 years. No routes are really failing in Montana, and American has done quite well. So I mean, when you add all that together, I mean, we might have a chance, particularly because we have a guarantee, right? I mean, they've got a lot of mature markets now that don't have any guarantees, and in the rising oil environment, with no guarantee and a recessionary tailwind or headwind, having a guarantee might be a safe place to park a 3-a-week type of route. And so, I think there's good and bad in there, for the look ahead, but my best guess would be weekend only to start. But I mean, nonetheless, I mean, and the other thing I would pile on top of everything I just said is we have no seats. As we all know right now, every seat that comes in here is going out full because there just aren't enough seats. That problem I mentioned with SkyWest, and they're losing pilots, they've had to stop prorate flying, that profoundly impacts Delta in the West because they had relied on SkyWest to really extend their route system. Delta's pilot contract limits the number of markets that they're allowed to do capacity purchase, which is what they normally do. They go out and tell SkyWest, I need 150 seats a day in Great Falls, and I'll pay you for that. So what they were doing is they were extending that network by allowing SkyWest to do flying at their own risk. And so SkyWest would set the rates and keep the profit loss, and they just used Delta's tail as a kind of code share almost. And so they were able to extend themselves into a lot of places. Well, SkyWest has quit doing that completely as of Christmas. They just stopped the line of business and they don't do it. And so, what we're seeing is Delta is really in no position to resume some of those routes that they've cut, like our Minneapolis. Minneapolis is down about 40% because of all the routes that have fallen out. And there are other airports like San Francisco. And so, everyone is kind of retreating into their mega hub. That's why you see Denver rocketing up in terms of the size of hub it is. I think last year it was 2 or 3 in the country in total volume. And so it's rocketing up. Same with Salt Lake, it's heading up. And then the secondary hubs in the same region, like a San Francisco or, which is primarily their international hub, that is seeing a massive downturn. So it's down about 40% too. So really the safest position for us to be in with all of these odd forces is to have, kind of the major hub run from every carrier. That's why adding Dallas is so important, is that is their mega hub. And if we can add that in, that's going to have some stick to it. They're looking to get people from Dallas to places like Great Falls to vacation, and so that has some stick. And to have more options on their brand in the Montana is something they're looking for. Same with Denver. You see United is going to stick and add that capacity in, even as we struggle. Discussions about San Francisco are so far in the back burner, I'm not even sure we've got a burner back there. And same even with Chicago. Even though right now, without Delta flying Minneapolis, would be a prime time to beef up Chicago, they're just very, very hesitant because they're trying to do more out of Denver. So that's kind of the environment we're in, and really the situation we're in right now, if we have the potential to add a hub carrier, a new hub carrier into a dominant hub, that is the best thing we can be doing, because that route probably has some stick to it. When things really start to head down, at least we know we've got the hub to care about, with a leisure option that's going to be palatable for a lot of people, that really want to take a vacation but can't go to Europe, can't go to China, can't go to these other places they might go.
Is American anywhere other than Bozeman in Montana?
They're everywhere other than Bozeman, except us and Helena.
Missoula,
Yeah.
they're Missoula. going.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't go to have her, but but yeah, the major airports are everywhere except Helen and us. So yeah.
All right, very good, sorry.
Other questions on that one? On the ticketing side, Rod and I have been deeply engaged in the last couple of weeks, getting the plans set to move to 100%, along with the team from Morrison and Maryland, RSNH, and LaRue Page Warner. We're definitely making some big progress. We had a really good meeting with Dick Anderson in the last week to talk about phasing. I think we have a solid phasing plan. We also had a call with TSA to talk about screening during construction, which will be, I think it's going to be okay. We're going to have a lot of hand moving of bags, but it's going to be a fairly short window because I think if we start construction, it really won't impact the baggage areas until we get into probably around the August time frame, maybe a little later than that, as we begin to make some changes back there. And then we'll hopefully be done by May. So we have that sort of 6 months in there where we're going to have some impact at different times. But I think in many ways it'll improve as we take down the walls between the airlines right now that are causing some real inefficiencies with United. United is our largest carrier now, and they don't have a screening machine at all. So that's already causing a lot of issues today. And when you look at Alaska, they can't add a second flight right now because of the pilot shortage. So they really only have one a day, and Allegiant's only flying twice a week. So really that belt down there isn't getting a lot of usage. So if we could sort of trade off, more accessibility for United versus less, in other areas, that would be a good trade for us right now. So I think we have a solid plan for phasing. By the May meeting, we should be able to bring a cost estimate to the board for approval. We'll go May and June to try and get a cost estimate. The May estimate will be a true cost estimate. That'll be based on quantities and everything of the 100% design. The June cost should be close to a bid price. So we should be able to get that wrapped up before the July recess and come to the board with a project cost on that to look ahead towards moving that project forward. Along with that baggage screening, we're experiencing some difficulties with the United bag screening area. That system is 40 years old, and some of the components are starting to, just not work. There's two belts that kind of join into one down in there, which is not uncommon. It's just a junction between two belts. There used to be an electronic eye on that if the ladder belt stopped, the first bag that stopped on the first belt would turn off both belts that no longer functioning. So what happens is the bags come down, hit the dead belt, and they just start to pile on the floor. I think we're going to need to fix that eye, unfortunately. And so in the last week or two, well, actually, I guess about a month ago, TSA had some inspector come in and do a safety inspection on that bag belt, and they identified several problems. We had a call with them yesterday with United to kind of discuss some of those. They don't actually have the report back yet, so unfortunately, we're all kind of throwing darts at where the exact problem is. One of the things they pointed out is the junction's dangerous, but I mean, we've looked at the junction 6 ways from Sunday, and it's just a standard belt junction, so we won't really see what that issue is. They said there's no kill switch. There actually is a kill switch. I suspect it's not where they want it. So there might be some minor things we do to patch that belt and try to get it operational, for the next few months so that we can kind of continue what we're doing.
You're talking two things. You're talking make the belt operational, and then you're talking pass the TSA safety inspection.
Well, so the TSA has identified safety concerns, or they're worried that they may have to stop using that belt any minute. United pointed out yesterday, well, it's not safe for you, but you want our guys using the belt. So we've got to have some more discussion there, but and figure out what these safety issues are that we have to look at. years ago, about 6 years ago, that bay used to have ETD screening systems in it. And ETD is where they swab the bag, and then they look to see if there's explosive materials or other materials. And then every so often they actually open a bag. It's a much higher ratio than they have to open of the ETD bags. So the process is much slower, but we're trying to determine, is that process better than taking the bags clear over to Delta's bay to screen them and then bringing them back? I mean, both of those have significant lead time. So we're trying to figure out the best path forward to get us through another 4 months until we tear that system up. And TSA is kind of putting some pressure on, well, we've got to fix it right now. We've got to fix some of this right now, but they can't articulate exactly what. So next week, we're supposed to be able to get a copy of that report. And we've talked to United a little bit. I mean, some of it I think we probably have to push back on some. Like, they have a new safety rule that the bags can't be moved more than 8 feet. Well, there used to be screening equipment within 8 feet that TSA took out, and that really wasn't coordinated at all with the airport or SkyWest. So that those were taken out of there without anyone's approval or even knowledge. And so, our opinion is, well, I mean, you took them out, you're going to have to move the bags until we can get the conveyor system in place to move the bags for you. We've tried several other fixes for that. We put a hole in the wall and put a belt through there, just a roller belt where you could put the bag in a roller belt and push it through the wall to someone on the other side. That wasn't fast enough, so we kind of abandoned that. We've done a few things to try and improve the process over the last 5 years, but it's never really met what they, with what they want. So we may have to do a couple patches to the system now to keep it operational, and then move forward to a new screening system in the next year is really the right answer.
What prompted the safety inspection? Was it a scheduled inspection or was there a complaint?
I suspect a complaint.
Okay.
And so that belt has been in operation for 40 years, and there's not been one reported injury. I talked to some past TSA employees, some present TSA employees, and one of the managers down there has been there for about 20 years, and no one can recall a single injury. On our call yesterday, TSA did point out that there is an injury associated with it, but it's a repetitive use injury, which isn't really associated with any of the problems. Certainly the joint didn't cause that. The kill switch didn't cause that. 40 years of operation is pretty doggone safe. There's more to come on that. We need to see, as we said yesterday, we need to see the report, and so we can address safety concerns and find a path forward to get us through 4 more months until we start long-term improving the situation. It's like an old car, right? I mean, you got to patch it until you can get a new one. The brakes go bad, this goes bad, that goes bad. We've got to make some temporary repairs until we can get that thing torn out here in a few months.
And that was the only belt they inspected out of the 3, so.
Yeah, that was of the 3 belts.
Something was
that's the
driving
only
it
one.
was, so, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so hopefully we'll know more next week. In other news, FedEx, we believe is. Have you heard any more?
No.
Okay. It's in the signature process now, which I'm not sure how long that takes, given that we've been in the in the contract review process for something like 8 years. But we understand it to be imminently signable. They've stopped asking questions and that kind of thing. So I think we're very, very close to finishing that. That'll be a great deal going forward. Gives them a 20-year look ahead on that building, so they'll be locked in for a while. It caps their cost at a known level. They'll actually be buying the building. It looks like they're going to go with the option of buying the building in installments to us at about 6.5% interest. They can pay that out at any time with their own financing and get their equity back, or save the interest and pay the equity amounts. We'll be amortizing that loan out just like any other loan over 20 years with a buyout at any time. We'll be collecting a ramp rent. That ramp is 20 years old. We know the de-icing system, city no longer allows us to release the effluent from the de-icing system there. So we know that needs replaced. And the slip drain itself is beginning to fail, so we'll have to cut that out and replace it. The rest of that ramp rent will be kept in a maintenance fund because we can imagine there'll be panels breaking over the next 20 years. Useful life of concrete is usually 40 years, and it doesn't, at 40 years the entire thing doesn't break. It kind of breaks in pieces over the next 20 years. So we can expect we'll be doing some panel pop-outs and replacing those over the next 20 years. So that ramp rent will accrue in a maintenance account that we'll be using to do maintenance on that ramp, and then they'll be paying a land rent once they've paid the building off. So we're excited to make that transition. It's going to save them a couple $100,000 a year now that the building's paid off. And so that'll be a really good step forward, lower their cost base here in Great Falls. And there's plenty of capacity in that building for additional volume. So even though they're at an all-time high system-wide in terms of what's getting shipped, we have added capacity for the future. They actually do GSE maintenance in that building now that doesn't need to be in there. And so they have about 20% more capacity in that building. So that's another good thing because over the last few years, we've had times when other ramps were under construction in Spokane, and so more volume was sent to us from some other locations, including Vancouver and other places, to be processed here. So we've got the ability to add more business through that terminal going forward, which is really good. So we're pretty excited about that. We did conclude the airline agreement in the last month. United was the final one that had not signed their agreement yet, and we did receive that. Was that just last week? Seems like a million years ago. But we got that last week. Now we have everyone's new airline agreement in, and so that's positive. Before the end of the fiscal year, we've got everybody signed up so we know what the rate structure is going to look like going forward. We did hear from Delta just this week that they want to give back one of their hold rooms. They're anticipating Minneapolis is going to take longer to get back than they initially thought. So they are going to give us back. It looks like Gate 2. The property department in Atlanta said Gate 3, but then locally I mentioned it to the management here because I knew they don't like Gate 2. And so then they called and got that switched. So now it looks like they'll be getting that gate. I'm not even sure I told you that, but that just happened today. Just happened today.
He was going to get to it.
It's likely we're going to get Gate 2 back. And the timing of that is positive too, I think, because that gives us a gate as we finish up the ticket counter next year. We'll be able to run some fiber there and have a gate ready. And if we have some new airlines coming in, it'll be ready to go. And so that'll be a good thing to have. And that's all I've got.
Any other additional information on the TSA contract?
Not yet. From what I understand, it'll be June before we really hear much else.
But you had to visit?
We had a visit. Yeah, we had that before last month's board meeting. They were all here for a whole day. I think there were 3 or 4 companies that came. We toured all the facilities. We went down and looked at the office space, and they seemed pretty pleased with the facilities we have. So all the feedback we heard back from TSA was very positive from the folks that came. So,
Comments, questions? All right. Into our agenda items. Remember, if there's any agenda items that present a conflict of interest, consequently require a member to abstain from discussion and vote, let us know.
I forgot one other thing. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
I had it here on my list.
We're still in the admin portion.
Yeah, so one other thing I was going to mention, the ATM volumes have just plummeted over the last 4 years. So we talked to a number of local banks. The volume on that machine is exceptionally low. However, as we presented it to local banks, we said, look, there's some worth in the advertising, potential of having a branded machine here. And so First Interstate is interested in moving forward with us on that. We're paying about $1,300, $1,500 a month to have that ATM service by an armored car. We pretty much have to do it that way because more or less you're taking a fair amount of money, a sizable amount of money in and out of that machine once or twice a month. And they basically bring an entire load of cash, and then they take what the cash that's in there back. So that's kind of a blind, you know how much comes in, they know how much goes out type of situation, neither do we. But to have that thing serviced now, we're underwater, I would guess somewhere in the neighborhood of $12,000, $15,000 a year. At least. And then we have a separate account for that in our banking account that we're getting charged for too, because it doesn't have a lot of volume in it either. Working with Sydney in the last month, we kind of made the decision we needed to move on that. It's just too much money to be losing every month, and the prospects for ATM going forward are not likely to be much better. So we're going to pull the plug on that ATM at some point, hopefully before the next board meeting. We'd really like to get it switched over before the next fiscal year, so we don't have that expense in our budget next year. But for this current period, we're not going to charge any rent on that. It's just simply not worth the business to come up here and service the ATM right now. As our volumes come back, hopefully down the road, that advertising value will be enough that we could potentially RFP and get someone interested. I talked to at least 4 other local banks, and none of them had any interest at all. And so we were thankful to find somebody that kind of relieved that expense right now.
So what you're saying is actually we won't have any rent payment at all, but we're not going to charge any rent for them to take over ownership and use of the ATM at our facility.
Right, so right now it's our ATM, so
Right.
we're paying to have it serviced.
Right.
And it's costing us so much money that, it makes sense for us to undo that and find a bank that was willing to do it. And so we found one. First Interstate is interested in doing it. And so I suspect by next meeting, or at least by the end of the fiscal year, we'll have that swapped out.
Perfect.
We own the ATM, or
Yeah.
what do you do with the used ATM?
We have another one in the basement.
We collect them.
Landfill.
We actually may be able to sell that, and we should look into that. If we can kind of take our information out of it, there might be someone out there that would want it. Like if you owned a convenience store, like at Bowman's Corner, well, that doesn't have a convenience store. Eddie's Corner. If you own something like that, and you can charge $5, or a bar, like that, an American bar, they want $5 for cash out of that ATM, and so if you can get away with that, it'd probably be worth somebody having. So, we might be able to market that thing and get it to somebody.
eBay.
Then again, if we lose all interest in any bank, even today, we still pretty much have to have an ATM here. So maybe keeping it for a while and ensuring we have a bank interested in doing it might be a better course of action. I can't imagine we get much more than $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 for that ATM.
Was there any discussion about putting one inside of security?
That's even harder, because then we've got to really struggle with the idea of guns on the airfield, which is not a thing I really like doing. And there's none of those armored car companies will come, into your security checkpoint. We've tried. We talked to a few of them a few years ago. None of them will come into the checkpoint without a gun.
Right. Not that I blame them.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Anything else on that? All right, into item number 1, task order 32, construction management services.
Yeah, as you know, we have a pretty aggressive program this summer, and the construction management services are for the portion of the program that, is it CHUM Hill or Jacobs now? Jacobs. You still like to be called Jacobs, okay. I've been seeing CHUM Hill on some of the invoices, so now I'm all confused.
That was with the last master share.
So in any event, this is the portion of the project that CHUM Hill will oversee. They have a number of task orders, or they have a number of projects that they'll be working on this summer. The largest of which is our nearly $9 million de-icing ramp out back, the big piece of concrete. They'll also be doing some work on the sidewalks out front, putting in that drainage system we've talked about to convey water out of the front of the building, and then replacing the sidewalk. They'll also be doing the oversight of our utility work out in the warehouse area that will be starting hopefully soon. And so this is a task order to get that work in place. Rod did complete an independent fee assessment with an independent engineer outside of both of our organizations. That negotiation, the proposal was about 10% high, and then
8%, yeah.
What's that?
8%.
Well, it was negotiated to 8. Wasn't initially 10.
No.
It was initially 8.
Well, it was initially 8. Jacobs was about 8% higher. And then we kept it at
And
that.
they kept it at 8.
Yeah.
So we, they are a little bit higher than the independent fee assessment, which isn't always that unusual. A lot depends on the experience of the staff that's going to be working on this program. Given that we have a pretty aggressive program with a number of projects, CHUM Hill or Jacobs, has assigned a fairly senior construction manager to be out here this year because they'll be overseeing multiple projects. I think that's probably where you see the majority of the rate.
Most of it
there.
was in the labor rates. The independent fee
hours.
Estimator had lower rates than what Jacobs was using, so that was the majority of the difference in there.
And that's the primary reason is we have a more senior person doing it than what the independent engineer had in their rate schedule. So we'd ask for the board's approval to approve the task orders so that we can contract those services to oversee our construction program this year.
Do you have the number on that task order? I mean, the dollar number?
Shoot, I just had it right there.
975.83.
I was on that.
975.83.
Yep, 975.583, yeah.
975.
No, 5. 970.583.
There you go. Gotcha. All right. Anything else you want to add on that?
Nope, that's it.
Cool. All right. Can I have a motion to authorize the board to approve task order 32 in an amount not to exceed $970,583? And how many cents?
0.
0.
0 cents. And 0 cents.
I'll make that motion.
All right. Second? A motion and a second. Any further discussion on our long list? And is that everything that's on the back page here?
Yeah.
So that includes the de-icing facility,
I forgot the tax rate.
the Southwest GA improvement, the light industrial warehouse, and the terminal improvements that they are overseeing, the pedestrian pavement, storm drainage improvement, and the terminal signage Schedule 2. Any additional discussion on that? All right, no additional discussion. All in favor of approving task order 32, state aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. All right, on to number 2, capital project light industrial condo units.
Apologies for the long memo, but we feel this is a pretty important point in the development of those warehouse developments out there. We have completed the sleeve underneath the roadway, which is about $90,000, and we've obviously completed the design work in order to install the utilities, but we have not begun the actual utility work. And so, the next phase, the board did approve the utility work last month, and that's about $870,000. So when you really look at where we are right now, we've got about $1 million out there in the wind on this project. We will be about $150,000 shy, we think, of getting all of that reimbursed from the TIF district if we proceed with the program and meet the requirements of the TIF agreement. Those requirements require us to have the first warehouse units available by December of '23 in order to meet those requirements. And then in addition to that, we have to rent the majority of them, the first 2 out of 3, to an industrial tenant or a value-added tenant, which there isn't really a solid definition of that out there that exists, but it's one of those kind of the city will know it when they see it type things. I think we can all kind of imagine, someone that's fabricating things or using parts to make something is likely one. Somebody that's doing repair work on a truck, likely not one. That type of thing. And so we're kind of at the precipice right now in order to move the development forward and meet those deadlines. We've got to make commitments to building buildings. And in discussions with Dick Anderson over the last couple of months, the cost of metal buildings has exploded. As we're all aware, the delivery times for the metal material have prolonged substantially to the point now where it's about 10 months before you can get metal for a building of this size. And so we really have to kind of make the decision to move forward in the near term. And so if you've looked through the memo, what you see here is kind of the short line it down to the recommended. We're suggesting that we go out and spend another $1.2 million to build 2 units. Dick Anderson plans to build a 3rd unit, so we'll be building a building that's got 3 30-bay by 80-bay units in it. The first 2 would be ours, and the last one would be Dick Anderson's. We will most likely move some of our equipment into those 2 bays while we market them. because at the same time, to kind of stem the cash flow impact, we plan to lease out the remainder of our buildings down near the Holman and AvMax development down here. We have several tenants interested in taking over our half of the building that we still have down there. So it makes sense to do that and have that equipment closer to the airfield anyhow, since most of our snow equipment now comes out of the SRE building at that end of the airfield. And so if we spend the $1.2 million, obviously we'll begin right away marketing those units. We have, through the development agreement, told Dick Anderson that if they have units outstanding, that their units will sell a lease first, because we are going to have some warehouse needs. So our idea is to kind of always sit on a couple, so that if we meet a tenant that's like, I got to be there tomorrow, we have the ability to try to figure that out, have a unit available, tomorrow. And so some of that equipment that we own obviously could sit outside most of the summer without impacting it at all, which would give us the ability to potentially build other units and get in front of that curve again. And so that's kind of the idea is we'll always have a couple of unfinished units for our use. We don't have to drywall the inside. We don't need a mezzanine. We don't need an office space. We don't need a bathroom. And so we can leave all those finishes off and kind of have that unit ready to customize for whoever might be interested. We have a couple of people who are already interested. I can't honestly tell you that any of them will meet the manufacturing requirement that the city has imposed. Dick Anderson may well sell their first one to someone who doesn't meet that requirement, and in which case that puts more pressure on us to look more selectively for a tenant. But I still think, given the potential get of $1 million in utilities, it's worth the risk. The analysis that we've done kind of here in the back in the spreadsheet kind of shows the implications financially of what we're proposing. So given the construction costs are right now likely near an apex, we think the units that we build this year might well be underwater. For a few years, until the market dynamics of Great Falls increase to the point where higher rents are potentially possible. I can tell you, as it says in the memo, we have one prospect who's interested in a 30,000 building of their own and potentially even more space in one of the condo units for some of their other functions. They are a manufacturer. If that were to proceed, we'll probably put this on hold, shift everything over to accommodate their project and move directly into that project. And we're having discussions with them now. We've exchanged some renderings. I think the discussion is very productive right now. I don't know, they're saying they need something quickly to meet their business needs, which I think we can do. The flexibility of our site meets exactly with what they need because they have a very fast-growing business that's likely to continue to grow and a very flexible zoning. They have an interest in the future in potentially having a retail type of space in there that would accommodate the general public. We can do that with this zoning. We can do that with this type of building. It's very easy. It'll be set up to do that in the type of building that we're building. And in addition, they might eventually even have some interest in being close to some lodging, which we can also do in our development. So if we worked with that developer, it would be kind of probably their building plus some option land for the future, scoot our building over and start there, type of thing. But it would take some pressure off trying to get our building built prior to the December deadline, because it would that use would fit the city's requirement. At the same time, I think we do want to proceed now with this because we don't have any assurance that we can work that out. So getting these units ordered and moving towards construction is what we need to do in order to get these done in that time frame. But there is risk associated. So in the analysis that I put together, kind of in the long spreadsheet that's attached, what I basically have forecast in there, and you kind of see it up here, is a pretty slow demand curve for these units. In that kind of first section there, if we've got buildings leased, or units leased, I should say, units leased and units purchased, and it's kind of a onesie-twosie a year type of development out for a couple of years. We know we've got some bigger demand generators coming, like the missile field redevelopment, which could potentially be a big deal for us. Obviously, we also know that logistics in communities like ours are becoming a huge thing. Between Amazon, UPS, and FedEx, practically every industrial space that you can find has been consumed in communities our size by those guys. And we think that'll continue to happen over the next 5 or 10 years. So there's some real big home runs that could move this entire development curve forward if we were able to latch into one of those guys. But we've got a relatively conservative, slow development curve here. You can see in kind of the authority cost side, we've got our land development costs in there. We expect to get the majority of those reimbursed back through TIF proceeds. Then we've got our building cost in there. That's kind of a negative outflow in that 2023 timeframe. Then we've got down below that, I can drive it on the computer if that's easier than looking at the spreadsheet. Maybe that is easier. We begin to generate some land rents as we go forward, kind of down in this area. Let's see here. I'm going to look at my screen. That's easier. So in this area here, we begin to generate land rents for all of this development, which is going to be our primary cash flow. Assuming that we're not acting as developer, we can act as developer. The agreement we have with Dick Anderson would allow us to sell units, lease units, if we wanted to try and tap into some more of that development inflows. Otherwise, we're primarily the land developer. And so we kind of have these cash flows out here that begin to escalate in the 5th year. So as we go forward, the rents begin to increase a little bit. I assume in the future we'll go ahead and sell our units eventually. So we've got some positive outflows here. This one's actually below cost by about 20%, assuming we kind of hit an apex on the building costs. And if we decided we needed to get rid of that unit when we build our SRE and we don't need to be in that business anymore, then we would have a positive inflow, but it's only at 80% of what we paid. And then the second one we get rid of 2 years later, that's at 100% development cost to get us out of that building. And so then we would be out of the building altogether. Even with that relatively conservative look at how we would act only as land developer, we still generate a decent return, for our use of our land. This doesn't in any way incorporate the idea of having land that's now utility served. So we still have another 85 acres of land that now has major utilities. I mean, 9-inch, 10-inch water main, heavy power, all of the things that you would want in order to accommodate any number of future uses. And so more or less, we get the remainder of the land developed, ready to go with this development. And so this doesn't incorporate any of those inflows, but still it's a relatively decent return for us. When you look at the developer side, again, because of the cost dynamics, so I'm looking at the wrong one here. Let's go back to this one. That's the better economics. So this is the base case scenario. Again, assuming the relatively bad economics today of high costs and a market that's kind of sticky on the rental costs that we can get, we really don't think we can go much above $15, $17 a square foot for a building like this in the rental market. And then we really can't pass through a ton of profit on the sale of these. Given those slow economics, the developer flow with that same number of buildings sold, they only generate about 8%. So that's kind of the base case. And the question to them would be, okay, let's assume you get one done and the economics don't improve. Maybe you don't do any more for a while. Maybe you sit on that and you don't really do anything, which is fine. I mean, we could all sit and just wait for the economics to improve. And so, I think initially the upside's not terrific given the current economics, but I think we all expect, and in fact, if you look out in you go out and Google a little bit, copper is already starting to crash. You're starting to see some downside pressure on other building components. So I think if we look at 2 or 3 years down the road, as the recessionary tide starts to come in, probably some of these commodities are going to be much cheaper and the economics are going to be improving. At the same time, our one prospect we're talking to, I think, put it best and said there just simply isn't anything to rent. There isn't anything to rehabilitate. There isn't any light industrial space in Great Falls that has high bay and a flexible footprint. And what little things are out there are extremely expensive to buy because there isn't any vacant space, and they're very purpose built and difficult to renovate because they were built by one tenant, a roofing company, a Pacific Steel, or something like that, and it doesn't meet the needs of a lot of the different users. High Bay, for example, they can't do that. We can. We're going to have a very high roof height in here. We have the flexibility to have a door on both sides, so it's drive-through. Very few developments in town have that. And so there really isn't a lot of competition for this type of development. Let alone our specifics of our location at the airport on the interstate, which is going to have some people interested just based on that. And so, this is kind of the base case. I did a second scenario, what I call better economics. Again, ours doesn't change any because we're not doing anything but developing land. We're going to build the first two. We're going to sell one at a loss pretty soon. We're going to sell one for cost down the road. And then we just don't do anything else but get land rent. The developer, on the other hand, what I basically did here is I gave them a 5% decrease in construction costs. And so if you just moderate the construction costs 5%, that yield jumps up to 20% on that development, which is pretty good development. And so that's with a combination of leasing and selling. Now, as I said earlier, there's nothing to prevent us from doing some activity in that lower bubble. So if we feel like that we can get that return, through the agreement, we're able to go out and buy these units at the same cost as Dick Anderson and build the units ourselves and have some in our inventory that we could lease or sell. So we could participate in some of that 20% or whatever the yield ends up being at that time if we chose in a future date to do that. So what I'm saying today is I think we should spend the $1.2 million. That enables us to get $1 million back in infrastructure that we're going to need to find a way to fund. If we don't do it now and we allow that TIF to expire, what happens is all of the development that's happened in the current TIF district goes away and we started a new base. So we don't get the benefit of the development in Loves, I-State, Holman's, Fuel Farm, Eagle Jet, missing one in there, Laura.
Sounds right.
Hi.
And one other one.
Did you say Holman's?
I did, Fuel Farm. There's one other one in there. But anyway, those are the major contributors into the TIF district today, and it's enough to bond the infrastructure we need to build. If we allow it to expire at the end of 15 years, we can ask for another TIF district. We can go out and we'll actually even get a broader definition of what we can do in that district because the rules have changed since this TIF district was set up many years ago. We can ask for that. The problem is it would only be based on future development in the district, the income that we could use. And that we don't have any major developments on the horizon like those developments to contribute into that TIF district.
When are you going to hear from that one company you're talking with? When are they going to expect to make a decision about that?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's a sole proprietorship, so I mean, it's kind of got to be on their terms, and they're doing quite a bit of stuff around. So I don't know how much a priority, is based on what's happening here. So I think it's tough to say. I mean, we definitely, in fact, I got an email from Dick Anderson today. We all met a couple weeks ago and kind of talked about it. He said, "Have you heard anything?" And I said, "I plan to rattle the cage sometime this week to kind of say, look, if we're serious about next summer, we'd have to get going. On a 30,000 square foot building, we'd have to get going. And utilities are going to break ground imminently. So the nice thing is we're making progress every day. It's just we don't know for sure what that first project is going to be right there on that corner."
Okay. So we build these 1.2 million and they sit vacant through December of 23. We're out 2.5 million because the TIF's going to expire anyway.
I don't think so. I mean, if you look at the TIF districts that have been approved in Great Falls, let's take, for instance, the west side, West Bank. When you look at what was in the application, there was going to be a fresh grocery, there was going to be 2 or 3 other things that haven't materialized, yet they were still able to use that, that initial TIF district. I think if we can't find tenants between now and next December, then we're going to have to go back to the city kind of hat in hand and say, okay, we've built the units, we're marketing, here's our marketing materials, we're looking for that, that unique user that you've asked us to look for, that secondary value user, in good faith, can we get these bonds issued and you know, pay us back for the infrastructure? My hope would be the answer to that's yes. I mean, we can't know that. I mean, obviously they can't predispose themselves, you know, to that outcome. But, you know, we have, you know, a good environment right now to be pursuing this. And I think if we can get units on order and begin to nail things down and come up with a delivery day and begin to market these, I think there's a good chance that we can find somebody in that time frame. You know, and certainly
Just to clarify on Sean's point, you doubled it, you said 2.5 million.
We
We're
spent
not
one,
gonna,
we spent
he's right.
1.5 or 1.2 for utilities.
well, that's and the buildings, right?
Right.
Utilities and the first 2 buildings.
No, the utilities themselves are $1 million.
Okay.
And then the first 2 units are 1.2. So we'd be in the hole about 1.3, 1.4, or 2.3, 2.4,
Okay.
and potentially get nothing back.
Right.
What we-
That's the glass really half it.
Yes, but what I would say, what we get if we do that is we get utilities to 100 acres and we get warehouse space that we need anyway. It's frankly not much different than where we were cost-wise with the SRE building in the first phase of development. I think, Chris, do you remember what that total was for 1.8?
Yes.
1.8, 1.6. So we'd be on almost the exact same position we were in building the SRE building. And so
But that was Fed funds that you got 90 reimbursement.
It is, but that's a Fed fund we could use for other projects in the, you know, around the airport. I mean, we always have a deficit of money, you know, I mean, it's Fed funds we could use for something else. You know, so I mean, there is risk and it's a couple $1 million, but my hope would be even if that happens, we've still got 90 acres to develop to earn back that $2.5 million. It's risk. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's definitely risk. But, I mean, I've been here for 10 years and, you know, we've watched that land, which is frankly our largest potential revenue source, sit out there and do nothing. And so getting it in production, you know, in many ways, and I've said this throughout all my financial consulting years, you know, exchange in an airport environment, exchanging reserves for revenue is typically a good bet because we don't operate on reserves, we operate on revenue. You know, keeping our revenue high enough that we can support rates for the airlines that are attractive is always a good bet. And so if we can begin to generate revenue off of a resource, you know, that earned capital that we get from running the parking lot and other things that we're doing that we don't have to do, you know, investing some of that in increasing revenue is in the long run a good bet for an airline, for an airport.
Because the airports, would they provide like fire services and law enforcement protection, something like this do, or?
Nope, it's in the county, or I mean in the city. You know, so I mean these guys can call the 911 service and receive the same thing that any other business in town would get.
So that's not going to cost to set up a Great Falls Police Authority.
No, they're gonna be paying taxes just like Loves. Loves, that's the one I forgot.
You said
said-
that.
you
Oh,
said
did I?
Loves.
Okay.
I'm like, what are you talking about? That's hilarious. You said that one.
Okay.
And the development that we've had just since I've been on the board in the last 6 years, bringing in iState and Loves and having all of that generate income
Eagle
is
Jet.
really, and Eagle Jet is really, and we're moving that direction.
Right.
I mean, I can see going down the front of the road, it's not going to end.
Right.
Especially if we have the utilities there to make it a one less year worth of development because the utilities are already there. All they have to do is set the plot, fill it up and go.
You know, in a community like Great Falls where we're off the major interstate flows like I-90 or I-25 or something like that, I-75, you know, the things that happen into our community looking for a place to be all rely on speed. And so the opportunities that have come through Great Falls that I've been aware of, GFDA and the Chamber, you know, over the last 10 years, have all had a component of how quickly can you deliver that site. You know, this is a huge step forward in being able to deliver the site. You know, and so when we're talking about a $1.2 million warehouse, but we're also talking about 85 acres with huge water lines and major power. that puts us in competition for all of those future developments that come through the community. We can now be as quick as anyone else because we're investing the year now to get these utilities in, and if everything lines up, the city will even help us with that cost.
This is out in left field and long-term. The one thing this city doesn't have is an industrial park. And down at that end of the city, we've got an ag,
Heavy industrial. Yep.
heavy ag,
And they're almost out of sight.
and outside's railroad.
Right.
Usually industrial parks don't need railroad. But on this end, we got a lot of flat land,
Yep.
south of the city into the county. On this side of the road, that's flat. The other side, you get river. That seems like way down the road, right next to an airport and an interstate.
Right.
Sort of, in a lot of cities, they're right next to the airport.
These are common. Missoula has a fairly good sized one. If you look out in front of the airport there, that industrial park. Santa Rosa has a beautiful one. That's one, if you're down in California in that area, check theirs out. Yeah, Tri-Cities has one. These are common at airports.
Yeah, because, we've been,
Pease Air Force Base, they have
I've
a
been
great
here 6
redevelopment.
years, 6.5 years, and there's been a lot of talk about diversifying the economy and everything, but we keep going ag. And it just seems, I don't know how you get something like that started. Usually you get one big company come in and sort of get things going. But
Yeah,
it seems like,
As Susan was saying earlier, our trend right now is getting into the regional medical center, but, that's already lumped into one area.
that's down there. And that's not industrial park.
That brings up the next question. Susan, any comments from the city on your thoughts of developments moving out this way or interest from people that you're hearing?
I think, a lot of times we talk about residential development because we're so short on housing. But as far as conversations about industrial development, I'm sure the planners are probably involved in that, and of course the GFDA, and I don't serve on the GFDA board anymore, so I don't have that insight. But I know anywhere where I have lived, and since I've been here, we have all dreamed about having a shovel-ready, I hope there's also data, John, that's been put in, shovel-ready, data-ready site, so that when somebody says, I want to do this, we'll be able to do it. In the Dalles, Oregon, where I was, Google Corporation came in because the city and other people had already invested years before to have that already, and they've expanded 3 times. So,
the Amazon Service Center in Spokane is right outside the airport there. I mean, there's a lot of potential given our logistics location. Again, we're talking today about a warehouse development, which is kind of our shoehorn into that site, but we're also talking about 100 acres of utility-served land, which doesn't have a lot of market potential as it sits today. So getting something going, even this project we're talking about with the local folk, the local person, it's someone I've known for a long time and have known the business, and was in their facility last year and just said, hey, you seem strapped for space. That conversation got the wheels turning, and now they're really looking at their dream facility. So I mean, there are a lot of existing businesses that would like a facility like this, but it's not available and they can't imagine it in our community because there isn't any space dedicated to it. We can accommodate multiple buildings of 30,000 square feet. Very few sites in town can do that. So if you have a business that might potentially grow into something big, there aren't many locations to do it. And if you're bringing a Amazon service center into our community, there aren't a lot of places you can plunk it down. But this is one of those locations.
If I can say something, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to go to work here shortly. I'm a worker, and so Great Falls is a working town. That's who we are. We've been that way since that stack was there. And so these small factories. I talked to a guy the other day, he works at the refinery, welder, clearing $200,000 a year. Factories. We don't need those big Googles. We don't need none of those things like that. We just need the small things. That's all we need. And that interstate is vital. Going to Canada, going everywhere. This airport is stunning. We got a railroad thing here too, that it takes, you wanna ship something really huge, ship it on a railroad. This place is stunning. We've got that technology thing that kicked in that hospital. Wow, when they built that here, I said, oh man, we're finally gonna grow. So, thank you for doing that.
And that's another, we talked about the big users. The other nice thing about this is these can be subdivided to 30 by 40. So a few years ago, I had a custom bumper built for my truck because I smashed up my normal one. And, it's just one of those ones you order and it comes in pieces. And the guy, as I was talking to him down in his garage, it was a wood frame garage he was renting from the guy that owned the house. And he tells me, oh, the guy's kicking me out next month. I don't know where I'm going to take my business. And he's a small shop, another guy working for him, so I mean, this is a big leap, but you get not much bigger than that, and this is the ideal location for a small fabrication shop. We've got welding power, oil water separator, common roofs, common walls. You don't have to pay for, 4 walls. You're paying for like 1.5 walls, and then a common condo association that upkeeps all that for you. And there's the opportunity too that if you've got a huge order, well, maybe I can rent a second unit for the summer because they've got an extra over there that the airport says they'll move out of. And so maybe I can flex up for a summer and rent that unit and then next year give that back if I can't sustain the business. So I mean, the flexibility, the location, the capability is something we simply don't have in the community. It's a big leap. I mean, we are putting $2.5 million at risk. Don't let anyone be deceived. We can lose all 2.5 million of that and be left with a couple of warehouses that we keep our extra snow equipment in. But in addition to that, 85 acres of utility-served land ready to go.
We're not losing 2.5 million.
Yeah.
We're investing 2.5.
Yeah.
Well, I just look at it, a year ago, we sat here, we started this discussion, and we were all excited about it. We made a commitment to get to this point, and for me, nothing has changed. I'm still committed to this project. So, it's time to put the pedal to the metal, let's get it done.
I don't think they're gonna sit empty.
No, I
The
don't.
space is so limited in this town that something's gonna happen. And a lot of the even buildings in this town are owned by one person. That's why they're so expensive. If you've looked for space, I mean, it's just, so I don't think they're gonna sit.
Are there any potential impacts to the airfield? Just since we're talking longer term now, as you continue to build up there?
No. 17 there'll be some height restrictions in portions of this development, but I think we figured out the heights are like 65, 70 feet, aren't they, Rod, out there?
Pretty high.
So you would have to go multi-story hotel or something to really get to where you would impact the minimums. There isn't a lot of potential to expand 17. There just isn't a demand for that crosswind to be longer given our fleet profile. And as you know, the bigger the planes we get, which is inevitable, right? Because we're not going to have more 50s in the future. The bigger the planes get, the performance is actually better. And we have the worst performing planes commercially right now that we're likely to ever have. And even from the military perspective, the newer C-130s and things like that have more capability than less. So it's unlikely we need more infrastructure in the future on 17. The master plan calls actually for a parallel to 3, or a parallel to 3, further out to that way.
Northwest FedEx.
Yes. So that
over there,
which would be far away from this development. And that's one of the reasons the FAA okayed us redeveloping this land when we went through that process last year, was because there isn't really airfield potential. Again, putting on my long-term planner hat, if I had to shade any potential for development out there, that I think we are foregoing some, it would be another parking lot, because we will eventually run out of space over here. Rod and I are starting the process of developing parking over here next to Holman, but in the long term, we will be short on parking in this pocket. That's one of the reasons the master plan calls for looking for a site on the other side of the runway in the long-term future. So one thing that you could say we could put there potentially would be a remote parking lot. The only problem with that is a shuttle operation to support a long-term parking lot is $160,000 a year minimum.
Yeah.
So you got to have a lot of parking.
Way to go to get there.
Yeah. Well, and you got to have a lot of parking demand before you bite into that one.
Okay. Shane, any comments from the chamber?
We support the project, and I think it's an opportunity for our community to
continue to grow, attract new businesses possibly for light manufacturing. Yeah.
All right, good. Anything else, Scott, there?
That's as much as I can say about it.
Or as Forrest Gump would say, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah,
So John, where's the 1.2 million coming from? Is that in reserves?
yeah. So we're setting, I think, about 10 million in reserves. Is that about right?
Are you including the investment accounts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're setting right now at 10 million. So we've been saving up for this project. We've eliminated all debt in the time you were off the board. So we're debt free right now. We've got 10 million in reserves. We're comfortable that we can absorb the 2.5 if we have to, and sit on that. In addition, the majority of this terminal project will be coming out of that same reserves. We can handle that also. We think this is probably, say, 6 million, or less. So we can still handle that. Ideally, we'll be getting $1 million back next year from utilities. We'll be flowing back in, but we've beaten up on it pretty good in looking at our cash needs over the next couple of years, and we think we can handle this. In addition, we have a lot of money coming in. We've got 2 more years of the infrastructure bill, which gives us another 1.6 for 2 more years. So a lot of the things we're trying to get done in the terminal, like the canopy and the other things you've heard us talk about, can be funded through those sources. We have another $500,000 that we're going to have to pay for that comes out for the roadway because a portion of it's not going to be eligible. So that's another draw we have that's going to have to come from reserves. But we have enough to cover those things that are foreseen, maintain a half year of operating expenses in the bank, and then begin building those reserves back. In addition, if passengers begin to come back, we get through this pilot crisis in the next 2 to 3 years, the parking lot is far more lucrative than it was before. So we should be building reserves faster. In addition, the new airline agreement allows us to build reserves faster because we're not sharing as much revenue with the airlines as we were prior. And we'll have the new income coming in from FedEx, while they're paying for the building too, which was revenue we hadn't counted on prior to now. So we're at a very good financial standing to take on this at this point. We're not extending ourselves too far. We have no debt outstanding. We don't foresee any other major costs. In addition to all of that, we're also at the end of our passenger facility charge application. So if we get into a cash crunch, we can start applying those PFCs to the local share of our federal grants, which would eliminate the cash flow from the federal grant program for the next 3 or 4 years, as we had that additional bill money. I think bipartisan infrastructure bill. So as we have those additional funds, we actually have PFC money we could use to match, so we can kind of stop the bleeding on our capital program from our local accounts with the PFCs if we have to. That's one of the things we're working with Morrison and Merrily right now on, is the building blocks of how we're going to fund this program, to figure out where we want to put the PFCs into the program to get the best benefit to us. So I can honestly tell you, in the 10 years I've been here, we've never been in a better cash position to take on risk and new investment.
What's the plan for getting the word out on this thing? Are you just trying to go downtown, or are you going national, or just around the state?
We'll probably start with LoopNet, and getting it out there. LoopNet's a national database. You can go out there. I found one of them on LoopNet in North Dakota right now, and he says he's been selling like this. Another development that you may have seen too, which is out on LoopNet, if you go down to Bozeman Airport on Jackrabbit Road, just outside the roundabouts, there's a development really similar that we modeled kind of this on, where they have a lot of different users in there. They're buying and leasing footprints in these buildings. Their main tenant is a company called Flask Cap. They make measuring devices for liquor. You can put on a bottle and tip it over, and it gives you a shot. You can actually make one for Yetis that you can put on your Yeti. And so it's for like fishermen and stuff that are on a river, need a quick, drink for the customers.
I don't think I need to measure that.
Yeah. I'm surprised they're that for a second. But then again, when you're paying for the liquor for the clients, maybe you do want to measure.
So what's the
We'll make that
status of the
3/4 of a
foreign
shot.
trade zone?
We can activate the foreign trade zone on this land.
Yeah, but they never have since
But it's so expensive. That's the problem. You have to have a user that
With this would.
you can't, well, so it doesn't make sense to activate it without a user, right?
Yeah, you gotta-
Because you have to pay the fees whether or not you're using it. The FTZ can be activated. It only takes a few months to activate it, but you have to have a user that's actually holding something in bond, or if they're getting parts in from overseas that they're assembling and call it a US made good. You really have to have that type of a user to make it make sense.
Would this fit into it?
It can, yeah. I mean, we can have, and you could do relatively small ones. So if you had a local user that was taking, the one I was thinking of is, I saw this business at the Bozeman one where the guy was making signboards. He was getting LEDs undoubtedly from China, just strips of LEDs. He was building frames out of aluminum and then, putting a sign panel on it and selling them to businesses all over town. That would be a good example. If you had a major business like that where you were shipping all over the US, all those components which you're getting in from China, you could hold those in bond, but since you're adding value to the product, more value than half the product cost, you can call that a US made good and not pay any duty on your componentries. So that's how it would work, but it takes quite a bit of that to make sense. And Casey, can I answer your question fully?
Yeah. Well, the Development Authority also is always entertaining prospective businesses, and they would just put it in their toolkit.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Brett's talking to clients all the time, and they send us prospects all the time. Part of and every single one of them we talk to, it's the same thing. Well, we would need to be in a building within 6 to 9 months. Well, that's impossible from where we are right now. Right. It's impossible. But if we can get the utilities done and we have a building frame set and we've got the pad ready for the next one, once sheet metal comes back within the stratosphere, we can pop these out in hopefully a matter of months. Yeah. And so that's the whole idea is we're going to be build ready.
Build the suit.
Yeah, and we can do the interiors however you want: bathrooms, mezzanines, offices, showrooms. These are infinitely flexible that way.
Okay, let's jump into, can I get a motion to authorize the airport director for initial construction of 2 initial warehouse condo units for a price not to exceed $1,210,000? And a second?
A second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. I think we got the cart before the horse as the discussion has been in-depth, but is there any further discussion? All right, no further discussion. All in favor of authorizing the airport director to spend not more than $1,210,000 for the 2 initial warehouse condo units, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
Thank you.
That wasn't so risky, was it?
We'll see, right?
All right, number 3, Southwest PA taxi line budget.
Yes, so you may recall when we came last month to the board meeting, we were trying to negotiate the bid we had just received. It was beyond what we could spend at the current time frame. We didn't have enough money in order to bring the project in at that cost. And so in the last month, we did some negotiating with the contractor. We did get the cost down substantially. And then we also talked to the FAA some about available funding through the discretionary program. As we all know, the last 2 years, we've seen tremendous escalation on our bids. That's partially due to a labor shortage, partially due to material increases. It just has not been a good bid environment, and people throughout the aviation system at least are seeing the same types of difficulties. And so we got a very high bid last year for the de-icing facility. We couldn't negotiate that within funding. FAA couldn't come up with additional funding, so we canned that project. We got a very high bid this year. This similar scenario was unfolding. We didn't have enough money. We couldn't negotiate the contract within the budget. And so we did elect to move forward by taking some of our entitlement dollars and moving them into that project. The entitlement dollars are what we receive every year. So we elected to put some of that up against the discretionary money that the FAA was funding in order to move that project forward. And so the FAA was counting on those dollars. We told them we needed to preserve enough entitlement dollars to get this program done, because for the first time in many years, we have multiple tenants that are interested in building GA hangars down in our GA area. That's a development we've been working to extend infrastructure to now for about 5 years, 6 years, since we did the SRE building. And we're now at that threshold where we have interested parties that want to move ahead with hangars. And so we did tell the FAA we could lend the de-icing project some funds. As it turns out, when we got this bid in, it was also above where we expected it to be. We had planned back in March, you can see, we came to the board and got approved $1.45 million. The best we can do on the project budget after negotiating this project down is $1.66 million. And so we are a couple $100,000 shy. When I talked to the FAA, I said, look, I need to claw back some of that money. Is there any possibility I can do that? And they did call me back and say, yeah, we think we can do it. They're going to allow us to amend the de-icing grant up in order to cover the money we can't lend them from the entitlements now. And then we'll be able to use the entitlement money on this project, which is what we had the entitlements dedicated to in March. And then when the end of the year comes, they're going to look for recapture money to help to cover the costs that we borrow, that we amend the contract by. There's a chance if they can't find funding at the end of the year that $200,000 might have to come out of next year's entitlements. But I think they're going to do the best they can, having realized that the bidding environment just isn't good. That they're going to do the best they can to try and fund that de-icing program fully, so we won't have to do that. So what we're asking to do in the board meeting today is to increase the budget from $1.45 million up to $1.66 million and alter the financial plan to include more funding from the entitlement funds. As you can see, we've added a little less than $200,000, but essentially $200,000 to the entitlement funding for this project. We'll also need to increase our local match in order to match the higher dollar amount since it's a 90-10 grant. We still have about $27,000 in state funding that we'll use on the project. The state was very gracious in providing us some funding for this project. But we want to reauthorize the project with a slightly higher dollar amount to allow us to get this into the program this year.
And the negotiating with the contractor, they have the ability to take the project on this year? And
they get it done. Yeah, that's part of the problem is they simply have a labor shortage. I mean, they don't, and it's difficult for them to mobilize enough people, but they have told us they can get it done. And as you can see, we were able to get about a 20% price reduction from them. Anytime we have one bidder on a federal program, we are allowed to negotiate. Had we had two bidders, we can't even negotiate. So it's fortunate that we only had the one because we were able to get about 20% back from the proposed price.
All right, can I have a motion to authorize the amount for the Southwest GA project to be increased not to exceed $1,660,000?
Make a motion.
Okay, second. Got a motion and a second for the Southwest GA project. Any further discussion?
What's the timeline on these new hangar developments? Where are these potential tenants and their planning?
So I haven't talked to the T hangar guys lately. They're having some discussion on the best way to develop those right now. It's a good question because one of them happens to be a metal building dealer. And so he's got the inside track on getting, I think he's a Butler dealer, right? I think he's a Butler dealer. So he's got the inside track on getting one, but he's saying the same thing. The lead time is very high. And so I think it'll be a rush to try and get it done this year. I'm hopeful they're going to get it done this year. The other developer that's building the two private hangars.
Yeah, you guys approved that last year, but
Yeah.
he contacted us and said, so I'm waiting. So, and he doesn't have a time frame.
So he might be next year also.
He's hoping not, but
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem right now is getting the buildings.
yeah.
So I mean, it could be that they slip a year, but again, we need to move on to the next project and have this in place so that they can build up to the taxiway.
We have another one down there that's looking at if he can not use metal, if he could use wood. by changing the shape, the size, whatnot, to be able to get it done too.
Can only imagine who that is.
I have two questions. Is this going to be an uphill or downhill taxi for these new spots?
For your Cub, doesn't matter.
It'll be slightly
And the
uphill.
second question, is there going to be facilities?
The T hangers are gonna have a bathroom, are they not?
The T hangers are required to have something right now.
Yeah.
A
Are they-
porta potty. They're not required to have
But-
something more than that.
But the new T hangers is gonna have a
But the
bathroom.
new ones should have
A
some.
flushing toilet bathroom. Yeah.
If you look at it, I think it's actually slightly downhill from the frontage road.
Yeah, but
To the
then
right.
they'll do it somewhere.
Well, I hope we get to the top of the hill, hang a left into the.
That'd be a full powered drive, you know.
All right, good discussion. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor of allowing the Southwest GA project to move forward not to exceed $1,660,000, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. If you build it, they will come. That's what we're hoping for. All right, we are to, you guys can flip-flop these things way too much. All right, number 4, de-icing pad budget update.
Yes, so as I mentioned in the last update, in order to enable the icing or the Southwest GA project, we had to change the budget slightly on the de-icing pad. In consultation with the FAA, the board had approved $7.887 million back in March when we had that project approved. The FAA is willing to increase that to $8.1876 million in order to allow us to get the entitlement dollars back that we had loaned, sort of offered to that project. So as you see in the line above that, we're going to reduce the amount of entitlements in that project by $200,000 in order to pull that back into the Southwest GA project. So the overall project budget hasn't changed. We're just simply changing the funding sources, decreasing the entitlement portion, increasing the discretionary portion. As I say in here, there's a potential that next summer we may have, or next year we may have to reduce our entitlements if they can't find year-end money. But the FAA said they're going to try very hard to find that year-end money so we don't have that impact on our entitlements.
And our authority fund spent stays the same.
Yeah, that doesn't change because the project budget doesn't change.
All right, can I have a motion to approve the updated centralized de-icing facility construction funding as notated on the sheet? That's way too complicated for me to speak. And a second?
Second.
And I got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of amending the de-icing facility construction project, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No opposed. Excellent. All right. I think that covers all of the items. Let's finish up this with the airport board comments. Mr. Hoban. Commissioner Gibbs. Commissioner Eric. Commissioner Smith.
No.
Commissioner Long. I have no further comments. Comments from the public. Thanks for inputting into our warehouse project. That's, I think, really important for not only the airport, but for the community. And I think, like we've been joking about all day, if you build it, they will come. If we get the infrastructure in place, I don't think any of us disagree, and we've been working toward it for a long way. But it's well worth the effort that we're going to expend to make it ready for them. So thank you all for your input at that one. Okay, any comments further from?
We have an executed FedEx contract.
Oh, really? While we were here?
You owe me.
Look at that.
Yep.
Excellent. FedEx is going to be around for a little while longer.
Yep.
All right.
That's
Okay.
a long time coming.
Oh my gosh, I literally started that right after I got here. Because I knew FedEx was slow.
Okay, with no further business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. Let's take 5. Let's call it 35 past the hour, and we'll come back and start the work session agenda. Thank you. Whew, my coffee's cold.
That's an
Well done.
achievement.
Hey, thanks.
You kept that all in your brain, didn't you?
The CEO retires.
Maybe I shook it loose. They found it under his desk somewhere, you know?
Well, plenty of work to keep you guys busy for a month.
No, that's really positive though.
Tractor gotta come first.
What you guys doing?
That is terminal up.
What you guys doing?
It's all good.
I saw you on the news. Everybody was discussing marijuana.
Isn't that what you want to be on the news for?
You made a good comment. I remember saying, oh, Sue made a good comment.
Yeah.
You can get emails and phone calls, certain individuals.
So yesterday, my emails on my phone, emails on my phone, or my. No, they couldn't.
I talked myself into a nap right there.
But what they didn't say.
And talk yourself into a gallon of water.
No,
it's not coffee.
In my house.
Hate to lose you though.
And, no, well, that's okay, if people need me, they'll call. Well, as soon as we got it taken care of this morning, oh my God, that person has been sending emails almost 24/7. Oh, it's beyond, as you saw. I mean, that's especially towards the main.
I can't have them at home, so.
So I was just gonna tell all your board members that I know they're gonna do your evaluation. I always loved your vision. Your vision looking forward. So, do I say that?
Sure.
Before I go out the door?
I'll take it, for sure.
So, no, I'm so excited about that.
Yeah, it's all automated.
I won't, but I could.
What a great day. We got FedEx done.
I know.
Got the board to approve the condos.
Yeah, that was a good win. Not to be announced.
Now we just get a SCASD grant.
I know.
Oh, that sounds pretty good. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
I felt really comfortable when I saw those results.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I
that's
feel
cool.
really good about it, so.
We're on a good.
Longer today, huh?
Yeah, you were talking or whatever, and I'm
Want a
saying,
cookie?
Oh, no, man, I'm
what that
full.
mean? I'm trying to think.
I didn't.
Using this for a long time. Oh, I think I have an idea, but I won't ask. Just kind of go, okay. Let's get this going.
Well, there's an upside to it that could be just tremendous.
That's